Alright, how y'all doing? I'm back again. Took me a little while, but I'm back here with this one. Middle Passage by Charles Johnson. Alright. This is a National Book Award winner. Okay. And I see why. I wanted to read his stuff because, hey, he's black, he's into Buddhism like me, so I decided, let me go read. And then plus, he won a book award, so he must be good. And I decided, I could have read all this stuff, but I decided, let me start at the beginning. So decided to do this one right here. Let me look up in here. That's right, Middle Passage. All right. Let me put this back here. All right. This book was difficult, even though it's like 209 pages long. It was really difficult because it's basically a blend of genres. All right. Now I'm gonna have to refer to my notes because it was the short size basically deceives how complex it is, right? Basically, and I had to look up stuff. Basically, it's a combination of picaresque, sea tale, historical romance, and a slave narrative. Okay. Basically, picaresque, that's pretty much episodic tale where the protagonist is a rogue. You know what I'm saying? And as you'll see, Rutherford Calhoun, the protagonist of this, he's basically a wastrel. You know what I'm saying? So he's a rogue. But that episodicness kind of gives to the story. You know what I'm saying? Because then when you're on another episode, you can jump to another genre. The next one, basically a sea tale. Basically, it takes place at sea. You know what I'm saying? But of course, the sea tale, as I found out, because you're isolated on the sea, basically a lot of times you have to go inward with a sea tale, because you're on a boat, you're not on land, you can't go anywhere. You have to deal not only with the people that are there on the boat with you, you have to deal with yourself. So that kind of lends to this being a kind of roman on Clef, where he kind of grows up, even though he's about somewhere in between 21 and 23 in the book. Historical romance. It takes place in about 1830, okay, up in the South. And there is a relationship with him and a girl named Isadora. And that's gonna drive the plot. Then you have a slave narrative, because while he's on this boat, they were transporting slaves. And I know what you're saying. 1830, slavery was, the slave transportation was outlawed in 1809. Well, as you can see, people still, were slaves. They still went to Africa. Instead of naturally reproducing, they basically just snuck them in. So that's part of the plot. So I'll kind of give you a little preview of that. Let me go to kind of the plot, and then I'm going to break it down by each individual genre, because that'll help me out. Because if I try to just put it all together, it's just not going to work. All right. So basically, pretty much, okay, Rutherford, he basically was a slave up in Southern Illinois. And he's freed by his master. Okay. He comes down to New Orleans, looking for work, blah, 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 blah. He also has an older brother, but I'll get into that later. Pretty much, he basically just goes from job to job down there, and he basically spends all his time chasing whores and gambling and looking for fun. Okay, it's kind of what he did when he was up in Southern Illinois when he was a slave too. So he just continues his life, but instead he's free because his master died, and on his deathbed he freed him and the other slaves. Once he gets there, he basically takes up with a girl named Isadora, right? And of course, Isadora, another black chick, she's a school teacher, and she's a good girl. All right, so she won't even let him hold her hand. But he's courting her, right? And she tries to get him to give up his wastrel, roguish life, but he's like, nah, I ain't really trying to hear all that, right? But behind his back, Isadora goes to a crime lord Sorry, I can't remember his name. I'm just gonna call him Crime Lord because he's not really that much important. But she goes to the Crime Lord and buys his debts. Okay, and she gets the Crime Lord to be like, hey, make him marry me. And the Crime Lord agrees. Why he does it, who the hell knows. But he decides to do that. So once he does that, Rutherford is like, he feels trapped. And basically the next day he's going to get married. But while he's getting drunk, as usual, at a bar, he comes across a guy that's about to get on a ship. So he decides to stow away on the ship and pretend to be the guy, right, that he meets, like, who turns out to be the cook. The cook, well, it doesn't work out so well. He's discovered the cook, even though the cook was getting drunk off his head, the cook does that all the time. So he ends up on the ship. They meet him. He becomes a cook, and then all of a sudden they find Rutherford. Okay, he's hiding like in a boat and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, stowaway," because they're already out to sea. So they turn him over to the captain. Captain says, "Hey, we're already out to sea. Just come in here. You're gonna be assistant to the cook, okay? And then we'll deal with you when we get back to New Orleans, right?" So it turns out that they are sailing to Africa, and they are to get a slaves. And it turns out they're going to get this particular tribe called the Almuzeri, right? And also they're going to get artifacts so they can sell like to museums and stuff like that, right? So basically they get them, the slaves, get the artifacts, right? And it turns out one of the artifacts, the captain tells Rutherford, hey, it's a god and stuff, right? I'm thinking it's a relic or something. Nope. I'll get into that later. So basically, they get the slaves. They're going back to New Orleans. All of a sudden, all of the whole ship, they hate the captain, and they decide, okay, we're gonna have a mutiny. We're gonna revolt against the captain and kill him and get out of here because they're just pissed off from pay, being treated like crap. Da 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 da. Right? And of course, the captain knows this, and he co-ops Rutherford, and Rutherford basically ends up being a spot for him. He tells him about that. Da 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 da. And of course, the captain's ready. He's used to it. He's an old guy and stuff. Oh, and he happens to be a midget too. So that adds to the humor. But before that happens, before the mutiny can happen, the slaves revolt. They break out, okay? And they take over the ship, right? And they pretty much kill most of the people and stuff because they were just treating the slaves like crap. Rutherford, well, I'll get into the slave narrative later, but basically they take over the ship, right? And of course, they kill a lot of people because of course they fight back. Then, right, they drift at sea, right? Because they kill most of the people, and the captain, they try to keep him alive, but he kills himself. You know what I'm saying? He's like, well, screw it. I'm not gonna go out here and lead y'all back and stuff, and then I gotta answer for it later on. So he kills himself. He's old. He's a midget. He knows the deal. And they end up killing other people because they fight back or they won't help him. So they basically end up just drifting and stuff. And of course, Calhoun, he laughs. And then they come across a ship that saves them, right? And it turns out that the ship, the slaves were actually the property of the crime lord. Okay. So yeah, and the crime lord's on this ship at sea. I know it's crazy. It doesn't make sense. Why would he be at sea? But yeah, that's what happens, right? Gets on there, they save him and stuff. They put the slaves underneath and stuff and da da da. But then it turns out the crime lord, for some reason, when Rutherford left, he wanted to marry Isadora. I know, it's just stupid. This makes no sense. But yeah, and he brings her onto the ship where he's out in the middle of the sea. I know, this is where it lost me. It's just too fantastic. All of this stuff that I'm about to talk about could have happened back in New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? That would have been more plausible. But whatever reason, one thing though, so basically, Rutherford Calhoun. Rutherford, he gets back. They feed him and da da da. They clothe him, da 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 da. He comes to and he finds out all this stuff, right? Well, it turns out that the captain who killed himself, he kept logs and records and stuff of everything, and Rutherford goes to the guy and tells him, hey, I got all this proof. You basically let these slaves free. You leave Isabel alone and I won't turn you in. Guy says, okay. All right. And then at the end, the guy's henchman, some big dude, I forgot his name. Turns out that his grandfather was at Al Missouri too. So he decides to kick the crime lord's ass and turns on himself. Right. And then at the end, Isabel's on the ship. He decides, hey, we should get married. She goes, okay, fine. Yes. They're about to have a sex scene where they get to it. I don't know why she decided to throw off her good girl thing and decide to have sex. But then they about to have sex and she takes over, takes off his clothes, takes off her clothes. She's about to get on top of him. All of a sudden, Rutherford, who's been whoring around with women forever since he was a little kid, decides, oh, I want something special, so we should hold off till we get back on land and get married. And he's like, they should adopt one of the African girls, the Al Missouri girls, too. That ended the story. That was it. Yeah, this story, like I said, the writing was very good, but well, it's multi-layered because there was so many different types of genres. So let me break down each genre so you can understand me. Okay, let's kind of go backwards. All right, basically, sorry, I'm reading from my notes. Yep, old school notes. Yep, I got one of those old books and stuff for your journal and stuff. So yeah, right, I'm not one of these little 17-year-old kids. Basically, the slave narrative, right? They actually do some backstory and try to go back into his life, Rutherford, when he was a slave and stuff. Well, it turns out his life was bailed because luckily he had a good master who was like all religious and stuff, and educated the slaves. He taught them all this, read and write, and gave them philosophy. He pretty much gave them the equivalent to a college university education because he was good. But basically, when it went down, his father abandoned him. He ran away, and he ran away without the family. So that causes abandonment issues in him, okay, which later contribute. That basically gets a diversion for him and his brother, his older brother Jackson, who's 8 years older. Basically, when his father abandons him, Jackson kind of takes over, not only taking care of him, Rutherford, but also becoming a leader amongst the slaves. He becomes a preacher and stuff, and so he ministered. Back then, a preacher was not only did he preach and stuff, but he was also basically a social worker and sometimes even a teacher. So that's what he does and stuff. But Rutherford rose to the occasion. Jackson rose to the occasion, the older brother, but Rutherford, he takes it negative. Instead, that's where he becomes a wastrel. That's where he basically tries to sleep with anything and everything that's around. And also he tries to avoid responsibility, avoid work. Even though, the master tries to educate him, he only kind of sloppily gets the education and stuff and gets the refinement. You know what I'm saying? And that's where he leads the life of, he gets father issues and then, is questioning whether he has value and stuff. The illegal slave trade, basically that pretty much shows how, it's 1830 and transporting slaves has been illegal for like 20 years by then. That just shows the greed of people. You know what I'm saying? Because here this crime lord is, shipping people when he could have, naturally reproduced, but he didn't want to. So it shows like the greed of money and immorality. And then it talks about the horrors of slavery. Now, they could have really talked about that, but for some reason he just kind of skips it, only talks about it after revolt. And he talks about the beatings, the torture, and the rapes, but he does it like really quick and then moves on. I think he should have, talked about it a little bit more, like interspersed it and stuff. But yeah, Rutherford's kind of horrified, and he really sees how he questions humanity when he sees that. You know what I'm saying? So historical romance, basically, the relationship between him and Isadora said, the antebellum, before slavery ended in 1830. There's like 35 more years before the end of slavery, with the Civil War. Of course, Isadora back then, she basically, a good girl, I mean, she didn't even let, Rutherford touch her hand, and that's what, nowadays, a chick can have premarital sex and it's okay. But back then, wasn't gonna happen. You had to, yeah, you know what I'm saying? And if her, for her, she came from the Northeast. If her parents were around, you had to go to the parents, win the parents over, and ask the father for the hand in marriage. So it was very structured and very proper. It's not like, she had to keep her virginity. If she was not a virgin on her night, she was not going to get married. And then Rutherford, he had to come a certain way if he was going to marry her. He had to be a white knight. Even if he wasn't a white knight, he had to act like a white knight with her and her family. So the historical romance, it's a real contrast to how it's done nowadays. And also the contrast is that, okay, he's leading this kind of rogue life, race to life, where he's gambling and having a whole lot of sex, or he can get married and get with a good girl Isadora and take responsibility, have a family, raise kids, be a contributing member to society instead of the wastrel life. You know what I'm saying? But because he has these daddy issues, that's where he's like, whoa, hold up. I'd rather go this way instead of that way in marriage responsibility. I'd rather just keep on doing this because he questions whether he, if he has any value and stuff. And that basically also goes back to the slave narrative, because remember I mentioned the god earlier. Well, it turns out it was a beast instead of like a statue and stuff. And it turns out the beast during the voyage and after the slave revolt, he's assigned to go down there and check on it and feed it and whatnot. He goes down there, right? Everyone who goes down there changes when they come back. It turns out that the god transforms to suit whoever goes down there. So when he goes down there, the beast, when he opens up and it gets up, it turns out it's his long lost father. It becomes his father. And he's basically made to confront the abandonment issues, the daddy issues that he has. You know what I'm saying? And once he does that, he kind of sees, hey, I can live a valuable life. Regardless of the fact that father abandoned me and my older brother, Jackson, so that kind of combines. Basically like the Sea Tale. Basically Sea Tales, basically they're a quest or coming of age story. Well, it wasn't a quest because they already had business going. So it was a coming of age tale for him. Basically, like I said, it goes basically a psychological struggle because he's in a hostile environment. Not only is he isolated at sea, but then also he's a stowaway. You know what I'm saying? He cannot, the crew doesn't trust him. The captain really doesn't trust him. Captain uses him to spy on the other people. The crew doesn't trust him because he's a stowaway. They're like, well, who's going to do his work? He has to do something. And then they become even more distrustful when they have the meeting about the mutiny and stuff. They're like, well, why should we trust him? Screw him. He's not up on here. He's not getting paid. If anything, if we need to do any killing, this fool should go first. So he's isolated. You know what I'm saying? The captain doesn't trust him. He uses him. The crew doesn't trust him doubly and stuff. So he's basically forced to go inside and really deal with his issues. You know what I'm saying? Especially when these slaves come, because he has to contrast his benign, loving way he was raised as a slave, given education, not beaten or raped or all the stuff, to where these people are kidnapped, starved, tortured, whipped, raped, and stuff. And he contrasts and sees how, wait a minute, my slavery was benign, theirs is not. So then he finds more of appreciation for his life and stuff, which contrasts his daddy issues. That causes him to grow up a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? Dealing with the horrors, not really having an older brother like Rutherford, or a benign or a helpful slave master like he had. Instead, you know, the captain's nice to him, but he's obviously being fake and phony. You know, and he can tell that, hey, you know, this dude doesn't trust me. He doesn't give a damn about me. He's just being nice to me, just to use me as, you know, a wedge against the sailors. Especially when he tricks on them and tells them that, hey, they're about to have mutiny. Okay, and same thing with the slave thing. He uses him. He convinces him to. Earlier in the thing, he gave him a ring, and it turns out that ring was not a ring. It was basically a ring to let his gun go off and stuff, because it's 1830. You have to have a whole bunch of stuff, and he doesn't want. He knows that the crew goes in to his section of the boat, his apartment of the boat, and he doesn't want them to steal it, rendering him indefensible and stuff, because he sets up like a whole bunch of booby traps up in this thing and stuff. But luckily, you know, because Rutherford is a thief, he kind of catnaps and through him and stuff. He's more successful than the other people and stuff. So they also try to use him to do that, but he kind of turns on him. But you know, when the captain co-ops him and stuff, that's why he gave him the ring, the gun ring. So if they do mutiny, it's like, hey, Rutherford, slip me the ring, shoot them. Then the slave revolt happens. He's like, yo, Rutherford, give me the ring. He thinks he's about to overturn the slave revolt, but instead he shoots himself. So yeah, the sea tail thing, he just, yeah, it's psychological. He just goes. And then the Picaresque thing, you know what I'm saying? You know, he's a wastrel. I mean, like, his life after his dad abandons him, he's a rogue, but he doesn't really do anything, because most Picaresque things are really just adventures and stuff. But he doesn't, he just goes to gambling and drugging and partying and stuff. And you can compare, like I said, you know, his older brother who takes responsibility and stuff. But at the end of it, because of what he's been through, he changes and decides to take, you know, responsibility for life. And he appreciates the love that Isadora has for him. And then also he kind of forms a bond with like one of the Missouri African girls. And he realizes, hey, you know, even though most of these slaves have died in the revolt, and, you know, her mother died, she had a mother, he can still raise this African girl and stuff. So he kind of, because a Picaresque is also a Roman on Clef, he grows up. So yeah, you know, he the situation, the pressure cooker, you know, the contrast at the beginning, he doesn't care, he just wants to live for the day, get pleasures and stuff, and even runs away from the marriage. By the end, he decides, okay, I'm just gonna live a very valuable life. I'm gonna get married, I'm gonna take care of this African girl, even though her mother died, and gonna contribute and stuff. And he realizes he does have value. Man, that's the best kind of breaking it down that I can do, because this, when you have all these issues, see, I could have shot this earlier and put it out, but when you have so many different moving parts, it's kind of hard. So I had to like kind of separate them and examine them. But these all contribute to basically, you know, of course, Rutherford growing the fuck up. You know what I'm saying? Instead of being this loser, you know, he gets his shit together. But it's messed up that he has to go through all of this, you know, negativity. I mean, like, he has to be forced to marry by Isadora, forced to work on the ship, and then has to witness slavery, and then he's part of a revolt, a mutiny by the crew, then he's another revolt by the slaves and stuff, and, you know, and has to stop illegal slave trade and save the woman. Yeah, you know, this is a lot of moving parts and stuff. I ain't gonna lie, this was a very good book to read. I really did like it, especially the psychological stuff, because it's told in the first person, so you're up in Rutherford's brain a lot, and the narration of how all this stuff affects him. You know what I'm saying? His dad abandoned him. He meets Isadora. You know, she wants to get married, doesn't want to get married, is forced to marry, stows away, starts learning things about himself, about the Al Missouri, and how he had good slavery, whereas they had bad slavery with the Middle Passage, the slave mutiny, you know, with bosses and employees, the slave revolt, trying to get freedom. You know, things got worse with Isadora when he left, you know, when he could have stayed. All these things kind of go together to try to force him to basically grow the fuck up. And to abandon his issues, his daddy issues, and be like, hey, screw my dad. I'm going to go up here and grow up and live a life worth something. So I can see why he won the American Book Award and stuff. However, my one critique at this, even though I did have problems with the combination of genres, even before I looked up on the internet to see what type of genres to explain them to me, because I appreciate the fact that the genre turned and stuff, you know what I'm saying? Because he did it real well. Charles Johnson did it really well and stuff, so I stayed with it until the end. The ending where all of a sudden, that was just ludicrous and impossible. I mean, why are you, the investor, getting on a ship that's going to go out and meet your illegal investment at sea? And then why would you go up here? This girl was going to get married to someone else. She gets abandoned, and then all of a sudden you're going to force her to marry her. Why? You know, up in the book, Isabel is kind of chunky. She's not the best looking female. She's not exciting. I mean, she is, you know, she's a good girl, but I mean, like, they're in New Orleans, so there's plenty of good girls that probably look better than her that he could have married. So, I mean, I know it's kind of, you know, suspension of disbelief, but it was just too far-fetched. Too many things together and stuff thrown together at sea. I think it probably would have been better if all of that stuff would have happened once they got back to New Orleans and stuff. That would have been more believable. It probably would have been more and a better story if instead of the crime lord trying to marry her. Because I mean, I could see it's convenient doing Isabel and the illegal slave trade together with the crime lord and stuff to wrap things up. But it probably would have been better and more exciting if after he gets the crime lord to back up off and free the slaves and stuff, if she would have been scheduled to get married to someone else. You know what I'm saying? Then he probably could have been rushing off to try to stop the wedding. You know, what's that movie with Dustin Hoffman? You know the movie I'm talking about, where he breaks up the wedding. That probably would have been better. You know what I'm saying? But what do I know? I'm just a dude reading books, reading them, you know, reviewing them on YouTube and stuff. You know, and he won the American Book Award, so what do I know? But hey, we're all critics. But overall, like I said, even though I did not like the ending, this was a good book. Like I said, and he's known for like combining his Buddhism with his literature and stuff. I could see some minor things I could compare to Buddhism and stuff, but you know, not totally, you know, because he, you know, one of the things of Buddhism, you know, you're not supposed to be attached and be part of the world and stuff. But he does detach from his negativity about his daddy issues, so that's kind of good. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, you know, he's a great writer. I recommend the book. You're going to be disappointed by the ending, but that doesn't take away from the rest of the book. A lot of people, they may be alienated with the multiple genres in the book and the blending of them. You know, to be fair, you know, that can be confusing, but also the fact that he does this in an episodic, which is taken from the Picaresque genre and stuff, that made it more digestible. So that didn't bother me. You know what I'm saying? I like variety, and the fact that he was able to combine all of these different type of genres together really worked well. So yeah, I have to recommend this book. I'm gonna try to get other stuff that he has written. and stuff, and then I'll try to review it for you guys. So, all right, that's about it, and that's my recommendation. Middle Passes. All right.